Hello, hello. Night number 3. What to do, daughter?
What is up, folks? How are we doing? I already chatted you, so let us know. Keep it streaming in. We want to see how folks are doing tonight. But I'm excited. I'm excited. This is actually probably, not to say my most excited, but I think I'm going to get so much rich information as a first-year teacher about the inner workings of who gets to decide what it is that I teach, what I learn, who my oversight, all of those sorts of things on a day-to-day. I know that the teachers who I talk to don't understand how that necessarily works. So I'm really excited to dig into that.
Yeah, man, I've been thinking a lot about and on Clubhouse. Clubhouse is crazy. It's amazing. Right? You know, I'm such an advocate, but I've been thinking a lot about like the pillars of education, and and if we look at them as students. We talked about that on Tuesday night. We had student voice and choice night, and it was amazing. The future is in good hands with these kids if we can nurture them properly, if we can help them become the best versions of themselves as guides, not as people trying to stuff things into their heads, but as people who are trying to bring out the best in them. And the other pillar being parents. So we had It Takes a Village night, and we connected them with the third pillar, which is community. So all together, those three plus educators who are going to have their chance to talk come tonight a little bit, as well as on Saturday when we go into creating the future of education together. When you put all of those pillars together, it's policy folks who have to help make it all work. I mean, it's them who we have to go to, I guess, to follow the rules around education. And tonight I'm interested in finding out how we skirt some of those rules and stuff, and how we go around and we make the system better. We obviously all know that big change is necessary and big changes are coming. So I'm looking forward to talking to everybody tonight about that. Eva, what's been your favorite part of the conference so far?
That's not fair. I don't think that's the answer that. I guess if I have to think of like a favorite one, I'm like remembering and realize now that I had met Stephanie, who like kicked us with incredible spoken word poetry to show us that students are just so bright and so beautiful, and we need to be creating policy that uplifts them and allows them to be their biggest and brightest selves in school. But I had met her before at an Integrate NYC rally around integrating New York City schools. So it came full circle for me, and that was really, really cool to see a student who I had met, who I had engaged with, who I had talked with, and helped curate this rally with. And then be like, oh, wait, like that's exactly why she looks so familiar. So that was that. I'd have to put that on my favorite, but I loved it all. I've loved it all.
Love to hear it. Love to hear it. What's been my favorite? Interestingly enough, I guess Stephanie must be a rock star because her poem to kick us off, and I love the other poems, but her poem to kick us off had me. I wish we had kept ourselves on screen because I was, snapping and just, I was rocking out to that, man. It was amazing. It was definitely amazing. I look forward to working with Teens Take Charge some more. So I guess one thing we got to always do is give a big shout to our sponsors. The Black Community Alliance at TFA, came through and definitely a huge supporter of what we're doing here tonight. Check them out in the expo when you get an opportunity to do so. We also have our friends at Ideation 4. They have an expo that you can check out as well. Center for Black Educator Development. They've been supporters from the beginning. We love Sharif and the whole entire crew. And I am missing one person because my brain doesn't work.
Take charge.
Teens Take Charge. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is why I bring you with me.
Everybody knows this is our dynamic. This is what we do. But let's get into it, right? Where you came to learn. So like you didn't come to see us fuss and fight as daughter and father. So let's get into it. Let them know what's coming next.
Yeah, so we have Dr. Tahira Dupree Chase coming up to the stage. I am super duper excited about this because Dr. Chase runs an incredible district. I guess I'm a little bit biased in terms of calling it incredible because it's the one that I happen to grow up within. But she's coming up to the stage now, and we are going to talk to Dr. Chase about her adventures in Greenberg and her thoughts on policy and how we create the future of education together. Welcome to the stage, Dr. Chase.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. What an amazing forum. The fact that father and daughter can actually do this together to engage people in just courageous and important conversations around educating, which means we're talking about the future. I think this is amazing. And congratulations to you for being a teacher. I don't want to mess up. How do I pronounce your first name?
Evalaurene.
Evalaurene, that's gorgeous.
Thank you.
Congratulations to you for being a part of this journey in terms of educating our students. Kudos to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We most certainly appreciate it. And the first question I'll have tonight is, why did you think this was such an important conversation to jump into the ideas around how policy and equity will help us create the future of education?
I'll be honest with you. So many people are talking about getting back to normal, getting schools back to normal. Getting schools back to normal means that we will continue to see the same inequities, the same concerns over and over again. This is the opportunity to talk about a new and improved normal. This is an opportunity to talk about how we can do better for our children. How do we do better for immigrant children, children of color, children who are living below a particular social economic group? This is an opportunity to talk about our children with special needs and how we can meet their needs. This is the time in which we could revitalize, if you will, revive, change education the way we know it. And so it's important that we're having these conversations. So many people are saying that children are losing, academic, their academic standing right now because of the pandemic. And I will say to you, that is not true. Mm-hmm. The pandemic is not the reason why we have the gaps that we have. The pandemic exacerbated those gaps. They have widened those gaps. The pandemic has exposed the inequities in education. The pandemic has exposed there are the haves and the have-nots, and it widened the gap. So now is the time to talk about how do we close the gap? How do we give kids equitable opportunities so that we can have equitable outcomes? That's why this conversation is great. It's timely. It's exciting. And I am happy just to be a part of the structure of changing the trajectory for education, especially when it comes to children of color, kids with special needs, and those who are in marginalized groups.
I love that.
I'm sorry.
And so I think the question for me, bringing back to how we started things off tonight, I'm a teacher. I know what is expected of me on a day-to-day basis in my school community. But I think that me and many other teachers don't understand how we go from Department of Education nationally to state and what they decide to what actually happens on a day-to-day in a classroom. And so can you talk a little bit about, as the superintendent, how below works and how above works?
So I don't want you to categorize it as below and above. Those who are in the trenches are doing the work. There's a difference. You are doing the work. Those of us who are policymakers, curriculum designers, we are providing the structure so that you can do the work. We should be shoulder to shoulder, equal partners. As a superintendent, I always say, I'm a teacher first. I started as a teacher. I will always be a teacher. I just have a fancy title. So, what happens is there are a set of standards by which kids should know and be able to do. And these standards are called national standards, national norms. And so these standards are normed based on an age group, and that's why we call them normed references. So the state is given, from there, the state creates a set of standards and guidelines by which they want children to be able to know and do per grade as per what the state is requiring. And that's how they create your standards, your state standards. So you hear national standards and you hear state standards. Those state standards are used to create curriculum at the local level, and that's what school districts use. So school districts have to meet a set of criteria that is set by the state, in which the state extracts from the national, and then it is then implemented in the classroom.
Okay. All right. And so I think my follow-up here is, I loved what you had to say about not thinking about it below, above and below. And I hope that so many teachers in your district don't feel that way, but unfortunately, I feel that way, right? I feel like below the ability to sort of see the change or do the changes that I would love to see in my classroom on a day-to-day. So just talk a little bit about, as a follow-up to that, what are things that you do and that superintendents holistically should be doing so that we can make sure that less teachers have that sort of feeling around feeling below or paralyzed by people who are in larger, that have those fancy titles. I'll say it the way.
That's perfectly fine. You know, I can speak for myself and how I operate and how I see my own leadership. I consider myself to be approachable. Somebody may beg to differ, but I try very hard to be just that. When I go into a classroom, I don't make a person feel intimidated. In fact, I try to make them feel like as if I am their partner. So I am not too far removed where I won't teach a class. In fact, I love teaching. It's my passion. It's my first love. And when I go into a classroom and the kids actually watch me teach and the teacher sees me teach, they're like, wait a second. That gives me credibility. That gives me street credit, right, in the classroom. Because I am willing to roll up my sleeve and do the work. As a superintendent, I would never ask my teachers to do something that I would not do myself. I would never ask my teachers to do something that I don't believe in. Before a program comes into the district, I get involved in what does it look like? What is it going to do for my children? Is it going to support the needs of the children and the population that I serve? If the answer is no to any one of those questions, it ain't coming into Greenburgh Central School District. And so I used to be a director for curriculum. I also write curriculum for a very large textbook for McGraw-Hill. I actually helped to author their social studies textbook, Impact. And so that curriculum blood runs through my body. And so as a superintendent in any superintendent of schools, you want to make sure that you have your instructional leadership hat on to make sure that teachers know that you know what you're talking about and that there's credibility to the programs that you bring in. So your question asks, well, how do you erase that feeling that you're here and I'm there? Well, you have conversations with folk. You talk to folk. You invite teachers to sit at the table when we're making those curriculum decisions. We don't dare bring a program in without having a committee of individuals who are in the classroom to look at it. We used to have piloted it so that a teacher can, at least have an opportunity to implement it in the classroom to see how well it works before we implement it widespread. I value teacher feedback. That's very important because they are in the trenches, not me. And that is very helpful. And I think it's very helpful in helping people to understand that we are your partners. My job is to provide you with the resources so that you can give my kids the best that they deserve. And so it's a matter of having people sit at the table, having those conversations, asking what their needs are, and having them to look at programs before we actually implement them. And to let them know, we're in this together. There is no, I'm here, and it's not punitive if something doesn't work out. If you need help, if you need to craft your pedagogy, if you need more professional development, my teachers know, my administrators know. Don't be told, I'll fix that. My administrators know, my teachers know that I have their back, and I will make sure that they have all the professional development and the resources that they need. Let me just fix this light.
No worries.
You guys don't want to see me in the dark.
You can still hear while you fix the light, right?
I can still hear you. Okay,
cool. So I'll ask the question. So when I was talking, earlier, I talked about those pillars, and I forgot one of them. The fifth pillar is the state, and and that's the state and federal, kind of bureaucracy for lack of a better term, and how we are, how we have to interact with them in order to do whatever needs to happen for children. It has to go through, these standards that you alluded to. So I don't know how soon you're going to be back, so I don't know if I want to ask a question yet. Okay. What I want?
I'm a superintendent, which means I have superpowers and I'm able to multitask.
I love it.
Absolutely. What I want to know is like policymakers, in what ways do they sometimes kind of get in the way of what we feel like we need to do for students? At what points are there times where you're like, damn, I wish I didn't have to deal with this or this or this, because that's getting in the way of what's most effective for a child.
Yeah. So I'll give you a case in point. A lot of times we politicize things, and when politics get in the way, children get hurt. I'm going to repeat that. When politics get in the way, children get hurt. Here's my case in point. The CDC has issued a set of guidelines for reopening schools. You and I both know that there are particular criteria that we must follow in order to make sure that schools are safe and that we open them responsibly. The CDC continued to change their recommendations, and it was changed based on politics, not on science and what's in the best interest for our students. With that in mind, it created hysteria. It pitted parents against the school district. You have teachers who are fighting administration, and it is chaotic. Why? Because politics got in the way. And at the end of the day, who's going to be hurt behind this are the children. So I say all this to say, if we keep politics out of education and let the educators do the education, I think we'll be much better off.
Facts.
Yeah. Y'all can get me in trouble on this line.
I'm trying to avoid that. I promise you that's what I'm trying to avoid. But I often say to people that, we don't have to be like-minded about everything. I understand how people can come to different conclusions with sometimes same or different information, but we got to be like-hearted, man. It has to be about the babies first. So you brought up the pandemic, and so we actually have to go there and understand a little bit from a superintendent's perspective, what are the key lessons and learnings from the pandemic. I'll set it up with I was listening to Bettina Love today, and she was talking about she was talking about how amazing it was that all of a sudden the pandemic comes and, oh wow, now we got computers for everybody. You know what I mean? Like, oh wow, all of a sudden we can. That's the only part I remember right now. But she just made incredible points around how the fact that the pandemic came, all of a sudden things that we have long been acting as if we couldn't have any influence over. The money for Wi-Fi for people is there now. The money to have computers is there for people now. So I want to understand from your perspective, what else have we kind of learned as a result of the pandemic?
We learned that food insecurity is real. We learned that childcare issues are real. We learned that there are disparities in health in communities of color, poor communities, immigrant communities, and it is real. We've learned that, we can educate children using a computer, and we can be creative, and we can reach a wide range of children when it's done correctly. We've learned that there are disparities in resources. As I indicated maybe about 2 minutes ago, the pandemic did not create these issues, it exposed them. And it pulled back the curtain of all the disparities, all the inequities that already existed, and it made it worse. So yeah, you're right, children do have computers, but let me just take it a step further. There are children with special needs who cannot use the mouse pad. So everyone has a laptop, but hello, it's not appropriate for everyone. So in our school district, we made sure that we issued a variety of devices based on the needs of the children. Because if you have a device, fabulous, you have the Wi-Fi connection, Fabulous. But you can't use it. You can't access the information. So, we want to make sure that although we're doing these things that we know are good practices in education, we want to make sure that we're still leveling the playing field and we're still targeting the needs of kids, because kids have a variety of needs. I've learned that food insecurity is a real concern. In my district, even when school is closed, we've learned to issue breakfast and lunch to children, even when school is closed during the holiday. When we have remote learning, I don't stop feeding my kids. If kids do not have a nutritious meal, if kids are not eating, how do you expect for them to concentrate? How do you expect for them to sit hours upon hours in front of a screen and their stomachs are growling? So, I've learned that childcare is a concern. Very early in the pandemic, we actually partnered with the Theodore Young Community Center, and unfortunately, they couldn't sustain us, but they helped us when parents, when kids were on remote learning and parents needed a place for their kids to go and have a safe place for remote learning. We partnered with the Theodore Young Center and they opened their doors. I'm going to take it a step further. Some of the churches in Greenberg, the pastors met with me and said, Dr. Chase, we will open our doors to help your children. That's what community looks like. When you have faith-based organizations, community leaders who are opening up the doors to ensure that our kids can learn and have a safe place in which to do so. I also learned that we have some fabulous teachers who are completely underrated, because teachers had to transition from being in the classroom, brick and mortar setting, to actually being in their homes, taking care of their own families, taking care of their elderly parents, taking care of their own social emotional health and everything in between, yet still teach 30 somewhat kids at one time. I learned that teachers are completely underrated. I've also learned that you have some rock star teachers who may be in New Jersey who can possibly help my kids in Greenberg because they have a particular skill set, and the computer using virtual learning is the way to do it, because now you can reach a broader range of teachers by identifying what those talents are in particular teachers, matching them to kids based on their needs. There are clever ways of addressing the academic gap. So I've learned quite a bit through this. I also learned that the parents in Greenberg Central School District are absolutely amazing. During this pandemic, they were extremely flexible. I communicated with them often. I went into their homes through the television. We have a fantastic TV studio director. My technology team is top notch.
He was here last night. Andre and Steve were with us last night.
They're amazing.
Yes,
they are amazing.
Shout out to Andre going off in the chat. I see you.
And so we partner with them to make sure we communicate with our families. Our families communicated with us. We had two-way communication. We used different modalities, different platforms in which to do so. And we worked together. I learned also through this pandemic that there are so many people who care about each other. We created something called Greenberg Cares, where a group of teachers and some of our administrators work together to help families who are hard hit by the pandemic and that they may have lost their jobs. They were struggling with putting food on the table. PTA came together, and it was just really amazing to watch the community of people come together. Many, many lessons learned, but I also will say that this is an opportunity, again, to make things right for children. This is an opportunity to take a look at the things that we always knew were wrong and not go back to them as we open school. Don't do that. Let's fix it. And now is the time to fix it. We have the resources coming in through the CARES Act. There are rescue money that we're hoping that bill will be signed. There are other bills that are on the table, especially when it comes to students with special needs. There's $12 billion waiting to be signed so that all of the IDEA money will be allotted for kids who actually need to help. Those are the kids who I'm really, really worried about, because some of those kids did not quite get all of the resources that they need in terms of their related services. But this is the time to be creative and start anew with public education.
I love it. I love it. And I think just hearing from someone who has that commitment to family voice, has a commitment to listening to students, has a commitment to listening to the teachers. It just reminds me of going back. We brought Bettina Love up. We want to do more than survive. And the systems that you're putting in place are allowing for folks to do more than survive, allowing them to have the opportunity, even in this really difficult time, to actually go in and thrive and go in and have opportunities in which to do so. And so as we begin to kind of get to the end, I want to, one, give you the opportunity to share the things. We have educators on here, we have parents on here, we have families on here that are listening. What are the things that you want them to hear from? And more specifically, giving folks the opportunity to think about how they hold their superintendents accountable. Because there's a few folks in here who are saying, like, my superintendent don't sound like like Dr. Chase. My superintendent isn't doing the things that Dr. Chase is doing. I've never met her. Or I've never met them. They're not in my life as a teacher. So I would love for you to kind of be able to touch on that as we begin to close.
And I'll just say, at least to the people in the audience, that's because out of the 13,000 superintendents out there, somewhere in the area of 300 or 400, I don't remember the exact number, are Black, which is sad. But please, Dr. Chase.
And out of state New York, there are 733 school districts in New York. There are how many Black superintendents are there? And you know, and I'm glad you said this. One of the things that I can say is that at Greenbrook Central School District, every kid knows who I am. Every parent knows who I am. Every teacher knows who I am. And if a kid doesn't know, right? And if a kid doesn't know who Dr. Chase is, I don't know where you've been. If a parent doesn't know who I am, I don't know where you've been. And that's because I go into the homes, I communicate with them. They see me out and about. They all know me, and I make sure that they know me. And I want to make sure that I'm approachable. When parents speak to me, I realize that no matter what their complaint is, they love their child and they're advocating for their child. I put on my mommy hat and I listen. I may not always give them the results that they're looking for, and that's unfortunate that I always can't give everyone everything that they're looking for, but I always try to make sure I do the right thing for kids, no matter who the child is. The kids know me. I'm in the classroom, I'm in the halls, and I give out hugs. I'll admit it. I can get in trouble for that, but if a child comes to me with their arms open, I'm not going to walk past a kid. I would never do that. That hug could mean a whole lot for a child. I give out high fives. I kneel with them. I sit with them. I have lunch with them. I invite them to my office. I think we have to hold everyone accountable for educating the children and communicating clearly what the goal is for educating the children and asking people to allow them to sit at the table when decisions are made. Those committee meetings mean the world to me because I get to know my community. I get to know my parents, my students, my teachers. They get to know me a little bit better. And then we get to make decisions together. I get to hear the passion that people have. And from there, it helps me to inform the decisions that I have to make. And they get to hear my passion as to why I do what I do and why I make the decisions that I make. So holding folk accountable doesn't mean that you're jotting down everything they're saying and you know, holding on to their every word. But what it means is that they're including the community, they're including families, they're including students and teachers in major decision making, and you hold them accountable by making sure that you are in those committee meetings, you're asking all the right questions, you're advocating for your children, you're advocating for the needs of your children, and that you ask those questions about how the money is being spent, and you ask for transparency. I would dare say most superintendents don't mind being transparent with families and letting them know what's happening and what's going on and what we need and what we don't need and what we can do without and what we absolutely can't do without. Just ask those questions. We can't read minds.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chase. We so appreciate you being here tonight and everything that you shared. I have so many more questions. We're gonna have to find time to connect again and expand upon this conversation. Oh yes, you have an official invitation to our podcast or I don't know if you're on Clubhouse, but you know, join us in the club. You know what I mean? We have these convos in there as well. I will second the fact that this community absolutely positively does love you. I talk to people all the time, and we rock with and fight for Dr. Chase. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and look forward to go ahead.
I love your community too, and I have to say, Jamaal, these kids make my heart skip a beat. I love the community. I love working with these families. I love my staff and my teachers. And it's very evident that I love what it is that I do.
Oh, and I love to hear that. I think that some people, even in the chat, they're talking about feeling exasperated, feeling tired, feeling frustrated, angry, unsupported. Like these are all things that are coming up in here. Also, people are shouting out your glasses. Just
my glasses.
You knew that. They love them, and I love them as well. I love it. I love it. So that was the last thing I wanted to. I just wanted to know that a lot of what you were saying, people are affirming in the chat. They are like, yes. And we even have folks that are like, so they hiring? Because they want superintendents that are doing the work in the way that you are. So I wanted to make sure that you heard that. Thank you. All right. Well, now we just need a bunch of what if somebody said we need Dr. Chase clones? That's what somebody said that. So people were really feeling that energy. We've got community energy. People are hyped. That was a great way to get started. And I'm super, super excited to introduce the panel so that we can get into, yes, we talked policy, and now let's talk activism.
Come on up, everybody. Tanesha Peeples, Jason B. Allen, Chioma Oruh. I probably said your last name incorrectly. You're gonna have to correct me.
Oruh.
Got it. That is my humblest apologies. Thank you guys all for being here. I appreciate it. We had a conversation a couple weeks ago. I was super duper impressed by each and every one of you. So why don't we just start with some introductions, and then we will get into it. Chioma, why don't you start?
My name's Chioma Oruh. I live in Washington, D.C. I'm founder, principal consultant at She Born Free, which is a family-centered advocacy consulting company that works on advocacy as well as practice and policy. Mostly work focused around racial equity in special education or disability justice in general. And I'm part of the Bright Beam Network as a DC lead.
Tanesha?
Hey, what's going on? Can y'all hear me? I'm trying to make sure my mic is good.
Yeah,
it's good. Sis.
All right, cool.
Mic check. One, two,
right. Because I DJ on the side, so I got to make sure the sound quality is
good. We might have to talk about that.
All right. What's going on, everybody? My name is Tanesha Peeples, and I am the Deputy Director of Activist Development at Bright Beam, repping Chicago, Illinois, Southside, Inglewood.
Jason?
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jason B. Allen, actually Jason Burke Allen. I am one of the leaders for Atlanta, which is a part of the Bright Beam Network. I would be remiss to say that Tanesha and I co-host an amazing show on Mondays. You can check it out on Citizen Ed's page. It's Talk That Real. I don't know if we have children that may be viewing, but it's definitely for those who want to do the work that we're going to be talking about this evening. So please check us out.
Okay. I guess I'll get us started with the first question. What is the work, that you guys are doing? What, how does activism play into the space of policy and equity? And let's go in the other direction. You can start, Jason.
Cool. So, well, first of all, I didn't say that I'm a teacher, and I can start there. I have the privilege of teaching social justice and activism at Seven Pillars Career Academy. That was basically birthed out of the work that we started doing collectively with our podcast. And Tanesha is not saying all of the many hats that she wears, but she is one of the leaders that helps us with activism with the Bright Beam Network. And so in working with her and being on her team, I have been able to develop the Atlanta Student Coalition, and they have been lifting their voices to challenge policies that need to be changed, getting people their age in voting. We flipped the Gwinnett school board, so now we have representation and people that are actually calling them to the table. We actually have a meeting on Monday to channel good energy from students around what needs to be changed with policy. So that's a little bit of the work that I'm doing that definitely connects to these two powerful sisters that I have the opportunity to work with.
Tanesha?
Yeah, Jason gives me a lot of credit. We have some dynamic activists throughout the country, which, Chioma and Jason are definitely part of that team. And I'm happy to support them in their work. And yeah, so we do a lot of work around, we definitely do activism work, but understanding that activism is connected to policy because policy is law. And so we can do, I think that the important thing is connecting the grassroots efforts to the grass tops practices and policies. And so to make sure that what we're doing at the grassroots level is written statewide and federally to ensure that our families that we are fighting for have those protections on the books. And so that's the connection between policy and activism, and making sure that again that policy trickles down to the grassroots levels.
Chioma?
Yeah, no, right on. Tanesha, take all the credit. You deserve it. You know, sister is like absolutely like my rock, and I know that she's the rock for so many other people in this process of really establishing you know, how we roll out with the work and expanding and growing in the direction you know, of really an inclusive way of approaching education activism, right? My I mean, there's so many levels and layers to my understanding and how I move in the world. So I guess at the foundation is I'm a mother, right? I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, and in those regards, I'm really intimately connected to people with disabilities. I'm a mother of two sons with autism. I'm a sister of a brother with schizophrenia, and I'm a daughter of a dad who had dementia, who unfortunately passed of COVID last year. And you know, they have been my teachers, right, in terms of how to live compassionately, how to understand and unpack ableism, and how to fight and struggle for their rights as Black men, as Black people, and as Africans, because we're also first generation American, and so from Nigeria originally. So there are layers to that. And as a Washingtonian living in Washington D.C., the great city without a state, we live in a complex environment, right, where you know, we're kind of a colony, right? More of a colony than other internal colonies of pockets of Black people around the world because of the setup and the dynamic. Educationally, it's just anarchy. And so, you know, the students that I work with, the families that I support and that I struggle with, that I live with, and you know, that I'm in arms with, primarily through Brightbeam, we've established a parent advocacy action team, which is comprised of 5 family leaders who are also Black mothers, grandmothers of children with disabilities. Who Jamaal, I mean, they just love Jamaal. Jamaal came and blessed us with his presence.
That was so fun.
Hopefully, you are too off-putting for our very gracious grandmother in the house. Shout out to Pari. Right. So a great bunch of committed moms who really love our people and love our children, and we look at it with sharp lens, right? In terms of understanding that we're Black. Yes, we're Black first, but we live in a parallel universe in supporting and being caretakers and being leaders of families of extremely vulnerable people whose rights and lives tend to be erased and ignored, and who struggle in silence.
We could talk about things that are so serious, and then again, that was such a fun night. I was having like a day where it was a good day, but then I was like, I'm tired, and then I got on the call with you guys, and you guys lit me up. So you know, if you're doing the same thing for the kids, then I know, you know, you guys are where you're supposed to be. Go ahead, Eva.
And so I think you all were able to begin touching on some of the challenges that we're dealing with. And I think that many folks who decided to spend 4 days out of their February coming to the Black on Black Education Conference also realize what those challenges are. Can we just start to talk about your organizations and your work as individuals, as well as people, a part of a collective? What are those solutions that we are thinking need to be created within and outside of the system? Because the reality is that within sometimes isn't going to cut it. And so I just want to get folks the opportunity to start touching on what are those solutions that we're creating to these challenges around the fact that the Black kids are not getting the education that they deserve, which in turn means that students with disabilities are not getting what they deserve, means that students LGBTQ plus students aren't getting what they deserve, and so on and so forth. So I would love for each of you to be able to touch on that, and we'll mix it up. We'll throw it to you, Mr. Allen.
So I was just gonna say that I can't even start with what they deserve because they're not even getting what they need. So for me, it's a need issue, and we all know this. So, I'm going to cut right to the chase. These are not new issues. I've been in education for 17 years. I come from a family of educators, and these have been the same issues that our families have been advocating for and against for generations. So now what are we going to do? And so the work that Chioma and Tanesha and I do, we are getting people not even empowered because this is something that is already within us, not even so much aware, but more mobilized. This is mobilization. We're doing coalition building because we can sit here and talk, all of the research and all of the data points. But if that is not motivating you to go back into your school on tomorrow and say, let me look at these behavior policies, because why are we telling Black children that in their virtual backgrounds, they can't have something that says Black Lives Matter? Because it does. And so that's a simple step that everyone can take. But I'm about action. So I want to see how are we going to motivate people to actually not just wake up and say, yes, I'm woke, or not for allies to say Black Lives Matter. That's great. And I'm appreciative of people who are doing those things. But in this conference, when I think about Black on Black educators and education and parents and liberators who want to see something different, what are we going to do to build? I'm all about building.
I love it. I love it. And I think it was super important to bring in that. You're right. They're not getting what they need. And so it's a step-by-step process to get the needs met so that finally that thriving can occur. Tanesha, can you take over next?
Yeah, so at Bright Beam, we're focused on child justice, right? And that comes from the understanding that legally, a lot of the students that we're advocating for cannot vote. They can't choose their representatives. And so as adults, we have to advocate for their needs and for what they deserve. And so with that, we've come to recognize that education does not solely exist like in its own space, right? And so there are other things that impacts a child's ability to be successful in a classroom, whether they've eaten that morning. I know Dr. Chase was talking about food insecurity in our communities, whether their parents have employment, their environment in their community, is it crime ridden? Are they in an abusive household? And so with that, we're tackling social determinants of health. And so we have connected education to all of these different issues to ensure that, again, our kids, our students are getting justice because they can't advocate for themselves legally. And that's how we're connecting the advocacy to the policy to make sure that, okay, if you say that we're free and we deserve equality, we need the law, because this country has not given us that. We need the law to back those things up specifically for our kids. And so if our kids are in Flint and they can't drink water, or the water is dirty, we need to challenge legislation. We need legislation on the books that's going to ensure that they have clean water in Flint, or that crime rates are going down in Chicago, or murder rates, because they maybe challenge some gun laws on the books. And so we're challenging all of those things at Bright Beam, not just education. We are an educational advocacy organization, but we're understanding that we exist in the ecosystem in which we need to work with everyone else across the board in different lanes to make sure that we get justice for our children. And that's what we're doing. And so, again, we're education advocates, but we can't advocate for our kids in silos. We definitely have to work together. And that's what we're doing as a network nationally.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Chioma.
Yeah, no, in the spirit of all the great ancestors behind, Jason, I approach this work with the knowledge that we're all ancestors in the making, while recognizing, that the gravity of our actions and the imprint we leave on the planet is going to have generational impact, right? Like, not just what has come before us, but what is with us and what is in front of us. And in that same spirit, I forgot to also mention that I'm also, part-time professor, adjunct professor at Howard University, currently teaching a course on called Decolonizing Disability, right? And the decolonial process is really kind of central to how I see the political landscape. And, as Tanesha said, it is, these are ecosystems, and these systems have functions, and these systems interact with us. And these systems were actually designed to oppress us. So if they are oppressing us, then they are working as they were designed to do in the original concept, right? So what we are actually doing is reorganizing, the functions, the dysfunctions of the structures in which we live in. What I understand is the systems of care. Education is a system of care, no less a system as the criminal justice system. And we know that there's an interrelationship between the two, right? And, all the other systems, the healthcare system, the recreational system. And why I say I promote, aggressively around family-centered practices, it's that dislocation from that center that causes a lot of ailment for oppressed people, primarily Black people. And there's a uniqueness, right? So while I do understand, and I am informed by intersectionality, part of the argument that I constantly make in life, in practice, in scholarship, is that the colonial process has a unique recipe for Black people around the world, right? And it shows up aggressively in the United States. And that is actually what we are seeing, the concept that we are living as an internal colony. And that means we don't have self-determined futures on how we design systems. We got to go through so many loops in order to even make our little voices heard. And our voices become a drop in the bucket based on the Tower of Babel that we live in here in the United States. So we're constantly fighting to articulate our human rights. And then when you cut that intersection with even more marginalized articulations of who we are as disabled people, as LGBTQ plus people, as any sub-marginalized group that is also Black, right? Like that is Black and, these other populations, and truly every Black identity is an adjacent intersectional point with a special form of oppression. So I think that framing that and understanding the future of education, telling our children the truth, as Bob Marley saying, right? We got to tell the children the truth. That we have to tell them the truth about the system, the history of the system, the function of the system, and that what we are embarking on to change it is a revolutionary endeavor, no less than Harriet Tubman and anyone else through history.
So I feel like you threw me an alley-oop, you know what I mean, for me to throw you back an alley-oop, like, you know what I'm saying, because it was where I was going, up next. What does equity look like in education, and how does abolition and being abolitionists affect this conversation? How should we approach that? I think we'll have Tanesha start.
Caught me off guard. I was I was having a conversation. Can you ask the question again, Jamaal?
Sure. Yeah. Chioma kind of spoke to she spoke to a lot of the challenges that we're currently dealing with, and this is policy and equity night, and many of the challenges that we have are because we don't have educational equity. So, there's obviously a lot of people talking about abolition in education, and I wanted to get you guys' take on that.
Yeah, so equity in education, I'm kind of tired of the word equity because, people throwing around like it's somebody's bald headed second cousin, and I mean, let's just keep it real. It's become, I think that first of all, public education has found a way to monetize, monetize our pain and our suffering. And that's through equity. And so a lot of people have launched these diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and they really have no clue of what that looks like. And they don't have a clue because they haven't reached out to the communities that actually need that investment. And so I'd rather call it intentional investment in our communities. And what that looks like is giving marginalized communities, specifically for me, Black families, the resources that they need and deserve to be successful academically. So let's just say, for example, Chicago is a very segregated city. I grew up in Inglewood. I currently live on the far south side, which is not far from Indiana, but it's two of the poorest communities in the city compared to Lincoln Park, which is one of the wealthiest communities in the city. But all of our students get the same per pupil funding. What is that going to do? That however many thousands of dollars, what is that going to do for a white kid in Lincoln Park, or what that will do for a white kid in Lincoln Park will not carry a black kid in Inglewood. And so that means that my cousin or my, friend's son or whoever in Inglewood needs more per pupil funding. That's what equity looks like. Given that we are in areas of high crime, we may need more counselors. We may need grief counselors, social workers, nurses, all of those things. And so that's what equity looks like. It's a level playing field for those families that have been marginalized, for those families that have been oppressed, and also for those families in which information has been suppressed, because that's a lot of our families are locked out of those are pushed away from the table, locked out of decision making processes because information is suppressed, and they don't believe in the power of our communities to make decisions on our behalf, and so they don't include us in that process, and it's not cool. So equity looks not only like investing the resources, but also bringing us to the table to make decisions on behalf of our communities.
Jason?
Listen, I'm gonna be very straight to the point. Equity looks like putting the money where it needs to go. Give us the checks. We need the money. That's what the students are saying. We don't have the resources that we need to be prepared for workforce development. So if that's what my students are telling me, that's what student leaders are lifting their voices to say, then we need to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to make sure that the money is going there. Because let me tell you what the oppressor is doing. They're making sure that the money is in the safety department, where, for example, in Georgia, Gwinnett County has $2 million set aside for school resource officers, and they're not even back to face-to-face learning. But you have kids that can't even log on for class because you all are not a one-to-one school district. So help this make sense for me. Where's the equity in that? The equity is we're going to make sure that the people that fear blackness and that fear black people are going to be policed, because we police black children in schools through poor policies that are not equitable, poor policies that do not put the funding towards exceptional learners, whether they're gifted and talented or whether they are in special education programs. So that for me is what equity looks like, making sure that we have the right people in place who are not fearful of challenging the status quo to say, hey, we are not selling these kids into the school to prison pipeline, but we're going to provide them an equitable, free and fair education that is going to allow them to be productive citizens in a country that for too long has taken that away from them.
Absolutely. Chioma?
Yeah, I mean, so there's two levels that I'm kind of thinking this through. So there's the concept of equity, which I agree with Tanesha, that somehow it gets, it's like a dog whistle for some people in terms of, when they're writing grants, like it's just a cool thing to say so that you can open up the pockets of funding. And then there's the practice of equity. So in Washington, D.C., we recently passed the REACH Act, which is a Racial Equity Act. And we are one of many cities across the country that are passing these new laws to address, racial equity. Now, the messiness in the process of this is that it's supposed to, so the REACH Act in DC, articulates that there's a role for the city council, there's a role for the mayor's office, and, it's just, a lot of bureaucratic language in terms of what implementation of racial equity looks like, which is a messier process. Looking at like how you train people. I don't think we can train racism out of people. I am not of that opinion. And I don't think it matters. But I think what happens when we raise standards, that policy really, it's hard to get to the hearts and minds of people if we don't balance the power pie, right? Like, and I believe that putting these kinds of laws on the books that start to set some standards around training staff, like what is acceptable practice in X, Y, in District of Columbia, the REACH Act is supposed to impact every government agency and every system, right? So the education system, the healthcare system, and so on. But we also know that within education, it's so, when I say colonial, like it's an embargo. Like, you can't, as a parent, even before COVID, I couldn't just stroll up in the building and just be part of it, knowing that my kids and other people's kids are part of it. It is already highly militarized, even for the parents. Matter of fact, a lot of the cases when I work with families, when I go in and I do advocacy, one-on-one advocacy to support them getting their rights in terms of IEPs, a consistent work that's found within this education advocacy for special education work that we do is that parents get barred. Black mothers particularly get barred from, the schools, because how our righteous anger is completely misunderstood, it's marginalized, and so that also impacts our access to making any, real change in the system. That is a question of equity, right? Because if Bobby Jane's mom comes, with her money and her whiteness, she's not going to get barred, even if she's even 10 times more belligerent than the Black parent that's coming in to the school environment, which I've only found majority of the people that are like going in the weeds of these things are people that typically do not understand and are not unpacking how the consequences of their ideas. I don't care if they keep their ideas, just that they know that it's not safe to practice those ideas. And of course, the money has to follow, right? You can't tell me you want equity and you have no investments, right? Like, from the educational standpoint, because equity is such a big thing. I don't think we're going to solve it even leading with education, because housing is such a crisis. In a city like DC, it's violent, it's ethnic cleansing. Like, we actually have to start at the basic needs of the people. And so you can't concentrate in school if you're not housed, if you're not clothed, if you're not fed, if you're worrying about your safety. And if the school doesn't understand its obligation in terms of meeting those unmet needs, those social determinants of health, and that when we see behaviors show up, that the response cannot be militaristic, that's an equity question too. Whatever that first thought is that you're supposed to do, whatever policy is informing crisis management and intervention, it is completely reactionary, which causes oppression. And there can never be equity if we do not really even start to think of how militarism, which is not rooted in schools, is rooted in law enforcement, and how they open the doors for that to occur in the school environment, and how they use that against parents and students, right? So there are many levels to it. And I think that these public policies that I hope show up in every town, and that we finally see federal law on the books, will guide the question of what it actually means to say that we can implement an equity agenda, equity policy.
Oh my goodness. Y'all are so good. Like, let me be quiet. All right, let me just ask this question. So good. Like, why aren't they listening? Why aren't they listening? No, seriously. How many times have we had this same conversation? Everybody on here talked about these same things, brought these same things up. In the room with them, the room without them, in the book, in the article, in the PhD, you get the PhD, still not it. What is happening? And so my question is, where have we seen it work? Where are those spaces where you have been able to see the work? And thinking about how we scale that, and the ways in which, as community, in this community, the one that we've created in this space and others like it, the spaces that you all work in, where have we seen it work? What does it look like? Just to give the folks who are listening those tips and those abilities to say, oh, okay, these are the small things that I can do, or these are the big things that I can do, to begin to continue to push where we get to that space where they're finally listening. And when they're not, we just do our own thing to make it work. Tanisha's like, pick me. Yeah.
I'm like, please pick me first. The interesting thing is, I believe that this country will not listen until we hit them in their pockets. So if y'all remember correctly, Black Lives started mattering for real last year when we started burning everything down, when they put they knee on George Floyd's neck. And that's like, oh, everybody, Black Lives Matter, and everybody, want to give money to the cause and all that stuff, right? And so that's when they'll start listening. But right now they still kind of, hearing impaired and action impaired. And so personally, I've stopped focusing on what they aren't doing for us or what they owe us, and I'm really coming from a space of what can we do for ourselves, and we got to do for ourselves. And one of the dope things that one of our activists, Maurice Cook, who's also in DC, he has an organization, the what is it? She almost y'all forgive me, it's late. Serve Your City Youth.
Yep.
Yeah, Serve Your City Youth. And he does a lot of mutual aid. So when DC schools didn't want to give kids laptops, he raised the money to get Black kids laptops, thousands of dollars. He's also implemented a number of programs for those kids who are unable to access the internet for distance learning. Those kids who are missing the socialization of school, he's provided an opportunity for them to socialize, outside of their homes and outside of the classrooms. And so we need more of what Maurice is doing. We have to do it ourselves. But just because we're doing it ourselves doesn't mean that we no longer hold the government accountable for what they owe us. And so it's twofold. We have to walk and chew gum. We got to build our communities on our own, but we also have to fight through that advocacy and activism. Because if we don't, they're going to continue to oppress us, and we'll never see the liberation that's supposedly guaranteed by the Constitution, all of that good stuff. And so we have to keep fighting. But yeah, we have to do it ourselves. And I'm becoming an advocate when we're looking at, as Dr. Chase said, first of all, before COVID-19, there was the racism pandemic that, COVID-19 is rooted in, that's exposed a lot of the racism. And I'm looking now, I'm like, why do we even still have our kids in these schools? These schools that aren't teaching them, these schools that don't want to provide them resources, these schools that starve them out, these schools with these white teachers that, don't care about them as people. Why do we still have them there? And we have models of freedom schools and organizations and people that have done this already, done it before, and educated our kids well. And so when I talk about hit them in their pockets, the minute we take all of our kids out of a public school system and they lose their per pupil funding is when they go start listening and be like, okay, well, now we want to talk about a quality education. Now we want to talk about diversity in the teaching force. Now we want to talk about equity. That's when it's going to happen. So when we when we hit their pockets, when we make their pockets cry, I got this line. I'm like, when our outcry is so loud that it makes their pockets cry, or something I said, I don't know, it was last year. I don't know, my mind is bad. But that's what we have to do. We got to hit them in their capitalism. And that's what'll make them listen.
I would add to that we all play a role in this though too. And so a lot of times we see leaders, and I think that's a lot of the history from the liberation movements and the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, learning the eras of the activists and the people that came before us, so we know what collectively we must do. And this is a fight. Black people love the, be engaged with these videos on World Star of people fighting, but we in a fight every day of our lives, and we losing because people are so distracted. So we got to get past the distractions, because the distractions come up, and that's what is pushing parents out of school. So how do they even know what policies are if they're not there? It's intentionally done. But again, these are things, as my sister just mentioned, that we already know. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do is lean into coalition building, which is one of the things that the Bright Beam Network, in my opinion, is doing very well, because now you have activists that are all over the nation that are doing similar work in our own lanes, and we're able to collaborate. We're able to build partnerships, and in doing that work, we're able to grow and learn, because that's another challenge. Everyone wants to be on the front line and to get policies changed, but we don't even know what's happening. in the classrooms. We don't know what Black children are actually experiencing. And so, what are we actually lifting our voices to do if we're not engaged with the very constituents that are being impacted by this the most? And that's the students. So I wanted to add that piece in there when we think about this work of activism. Are we advocating for things that we think is best? Because if that's the case, why do we have so many Black and brown children being pushed back into face-to-face learning in crowded schools that were already failing them before because parents needed childcare? Because then we have this mixed up in the mindset that we just put children in school for somebody to watch them and for somebody to feed them. So that's parenting, that's rearing, that's childcare. And so if that's what we want education to do, then we definitely need to create a better option for Black and brown children who really want to receive a quality education to get that. And we know the answer is it's not happening in traditional public schools.
Yeah, I'll add to it in saying that when I first heard the question, so my mind goes back to 7th century AD, because that's so. I'll try and quickly say this in this way, right? Like when I think to the time when we were actually successful, that was long before we were ever introduced to the European way of thinking about ourselves, right? As slaves, as colonial subjects, as objects of history and not subjects of our own history. And in the effort to not romanticize what that meant, um, I did my dissertation study trying to unpack and understand this concept of primordial African matriarchy, which is a theory that was forwarded by Cheikh Anta Diop, who people know for the work that he's done around African civilizations. But one of the things he unpacked was the strength in the worldview of the pre-colonial African mind and pre-colonial African societies was matriarchy. That many African societies had succession rights passed down through the mother, which defined a lot of social functions, which defined social order and what we valued. And by saying that matriarchal societies, it never meant women dominant. Matter of fact, the concept of gender is something that was imposed on us by colonialism. We didn't, if you look at a lot of African languages and my own language in Igbo, we don't have pronouns in terms of male and female. It's now politically, solvent to start IDing yourself by your pronoun because of the limitations of the English language. Pre-colonial African societies is a book called, again, The Invention of Women, that we were not by mother-centered, by being matriarchal, never meant being woman-centered. It meant actually being children-centered because the mother was raising the children to take the inheritance of whatever she did. And the mother controlled agriculture. She controlled the means and modes of production. She controlled the economy. So when Europeans came to Africa to colonize, and when they started reorganizing the world in the United States and other places, they created these societies that took the power away from the mother, which is how indigenous African people understood how a society should run. What does that mean in 2021? When a mother announces that she's pregnant, or a Black mother announces that she's pregnant, the family cringes because now you're thinking about how you're seeing a pregnant mother as a deficit, as a problem to solve in society, not as the wealth of the nation and the wealth of the people and the future of society, right? When you come into a school environment and they only want to talk about the child as if the child is dislocated from a unit and a legacy and bloodlines and a history and a people, and you keep them as they're these individual products that you're just going to poke and prod and input information to, not necessarily reaffirm who they are and reaffirm who they are from and who they belong to, whose womb they came out of, what society incubated and surrounded them with love. If we're not affirming those kinds of things that have been the foundation of true democratic societies, that our ancestors truly found it. And I'm a political scientist. I'm not an anthropologist, okay? I'm not even necessarily studying this from the perspective of thinking about our glorious past. I'm looking at it as system functions and what informed those systems, what theories offered those systems, and how people were sustained in those African systems. And we have access to that information. And I want to bring that back. I want to bring our wealth back, and I want it to be tangible, and I want it to inform policy moving forward, because truly it's the only thing that has worked.
So Chioma, we actually gonna go right back to you. We're gonna have you expound upon what you were just mentioning, because it's and we'll do two things, because Jason, I forget, no, who's Tanesha? You said, why are we still sending people to these schools? So yeah, why are we still sending people to these schools? Is it better for us to go small as opposed to big, and find ways to have more homeschooling, more, if it's in the projects, that there's a community room downstairs, like having somebody come in and teach down there? Like, is it better to do that? And tie it in with strategies that people can actually use to develop some of the learning plans that you just alluded to, Chioma, where the rubber actually hits the road.
Yeah, just deepening the understanding of these primordial pre-colonial African societies, they were decentralized, which means, right, like, they were not anarchic societies. There was order to them, but they were decentralized. So to that, I mean that there isn't one. Part of how the power pie should be sliced should give the autonomy. When I say I'm family centered, that really is the strongest statement I think can be made around school choice, right? And choosing your location of services and being empowered to make informed, to inform consent. We should be able to choose that where we want to. For me, it's not solvent for me to say I want to homeschool my kids. I'm a single mother of two, sons with autism that require socialization. I need to figure out a way for them to be in the social world, as well as affirmed in their individual, unique learning styles. So that means that I'm going to have to get creative. If I can be allotted, that means the whole system needs to work. So if you say homeschooling is an answer, I would happily homeschool if I had the economy to homeschool, if I had the related services, access to speech therapy, occupational therapy, behavioral health services, that if I was able to take from a menu of things and that the system provides, that it's not just the market that provides that some things we shouldn't leave to the market, even as everything needs to be measurable and everything needs to be tangible, and some things need to be in the social trust. So me making a decision as to where I educate my kids, if we're saying that is my individual decision, and I don't live in an individual world, I live in a system I didn't even create, and none of my ancestors created, then that means that I'm going to need you to give me a lift. I need a tax credit. I need voucher. I need universal basic income. I need universal health care. I need all of that to work for me to actually be an empowered parent making an informed decision about the choice of my household, because that's where the power actually is, in my household and every other person's household. And I think we frame it around there. I think we can answer the question authentically. That's.
Thank you, Chioma. We appreciate it. Jason, how you gonna top that?
Well, I would just add this, that another more recent time that we can highlight and pinpoint is Reconstruction. And we know of this, but our children are not being taught this, one, because we don't have culturally inclusive curriculum in public schools. So unless you're at a freedom school or a school like Ivy Prep, the first charter commission all-girls school in the state of Georgia for Black and brown children, or even a school like Seven Pillars that has a curriculum that is designed and based on the principles of Kwanzaa, because that is what our school does. And so to connect to Chioma's point, it starts with the curriculum and what we're teaching our children, and then how are we training our teachers? Because I also saw in the comments that what can be done around reaching teachers who need to reach our families, because again, we can't take for granted that people know this. I want to highlight the talented 10 and this 10% of elitism and wealth in the Black race. But also I attribute to that number those of us who are educated, because now we are growing and we're learning and we know about the systems and we know the ways in which they can be dismantled. But we are a small percent. We are not the 80%. Even if you go, let's go to the Tyler Perry movie, Why Did I Get Married, and the 80-20 rule, right? We're not the 80%. We're not the 80, we're the 20. We're trying to reach the masses. So how do we reach the masses when they're illiterate and they can't read, when they're starving and they don't have food, when they don't have transportation to get to work, when they don't have housing? Because again, it connects to the systems that have been designed to entrap Blackness. And so this is the educator in me. This is one of the books that I use to teach my students in my social justice class. The second founding, one of the guests on our show, Kimberly Jones, who's a fellow activist here in Atlanta, she recommended this book, and it opened up so many doors because I'm highlighting things in curriculum for the state of Georgia, and I'm like, wow, this is missing. Oh, wow, this is why our kids are functioning in this manner, because they don't know. So for me, it starts with improving curriculum. And we know that public schools are not going to do this. From being a former district administrator, it's the amount of policies. Look at all of the policies that connect to curriculum. And then when you look at curriculum, go to the part where procurement plays a role in education, because it is very much business. If we don't want to accept that, I'm fine with it. However, school and education is very much business. When you go to any of your school system sites and look at procurement, it's going to bring up all of these contracts. And this is the true work of the school board. They're focusing on these contracts. They're focusing on this money. That is why the people that we elect, they do play a major role in this, because where are these contracts going? Less than 3% are going to people of color. So this is why we don't have any curriculum that matches what this sister was just dropping on us in regards to why this connects to our ancestry, because the people that have the influence and the money, they know this already. So we just now waking up, and they already have been advanced this. And so I want to end on this. Going back to Reconstruction, how were we doing this successfully? We were doing this through our faith-based communities, through Black Muslims that started freedom-based schools, through the Black Christian and Black churches that started not just grammar schools, but they also helped to start many of our HBCUs. That model worked. How do we know it worked? Because we still have HBCUs right now. So now what do we need to do in an attack on Black people? Not even with the pandemic, but just outside of that, how do we take advantage of Black churches that are suffering, which is where we came from, building grammar schools? So we should, in a sense, return to where we came, because if they're the largest landowner in this nation for Black and brown people, then we need to lean heavily on that instead of going back to the same systems that are locking us out.
Tanesha?
I mean, do y'all need me on this? Like, Jason, you know, I mean, they said it all. Like, what y'all need from me?
I get it. We did have some questions in the chat. Eva, you want to throw those out there, please?
I do think that some of the questions that came from the chat were answered.
Right.
So thinking about that, like what now, that what now is going back and looking at what we know works and working on activism, working on coalition building, connecting back to the people who know how to do these things, and then continuing to scale that. I mean, there's no way that there's going to be a tomorrow where like it just happens. Like that's just, I mean, unfortunately, that's not the case. We will all very likely be leaving this issue to our children and our children's children, unfortunately. And so I think that it's that consistent need to look at the long haul, looking at it from a, no, we can't fix this just by having the Black on Black Education Conference. No, we can't fix this just by following this Instagram and like, no, we can't fix them that way. It's a long-term commitment to looking back and using that to move forward. I'm just trying to summarize all of just the PhD level lecture that I was just in. And so where are we on time? We are at the end, which is just, I don't want it to end, but we have to. And so thinking about all of which was talked about now, I just want each of you to have the opportunity to give a call to action. I know we've talked several times about being action oriented, and we can talk all day, but give folks that one thing that you want to be able to give and leave folks with, that they can take into their non-responsive, non-listening school districts that they work in. Sorry, Dad, I just can't. I'm sorry, I can't. Sorry. I'm supposed to be doing better with that. He told me I have to stop doing that. But yes, what can people take back with them to their day-to-day jobs, their day-to-day lives, their day-to-day activism?
And also just make sure everybody knows how they can get in touch with you guys and how they can support the work that you're doing as a part of your response too, please. So Tanesha, we'll get you in there now.
I would say, this is the time for revolution. And if you are unwilling to be an abolitionist, if you are unwilling to be a revolutionary, then this may not be the fight for you. But I think that, in this moment in time, is all hands on deck, because we're seeing our communities attacked internally and externally. And it's up to us to save it, save them. We not go get that from the government. And it's up to us to also be role models for our young people. It's up to us to use Sankofa. We were talking about that in the chat. They won't know where they're going unless they know where they came from. And so it's up to us to educate ourselves and, pass that education on to them and pass that power on to them. So I would just say, be a revolutionary. Everybody saw Judas and the Black Messiah by now, so take Brother Fred Hampton, be Fred Hampton Jr.'s, go out, be a revolutionary, challenge these systems of oppression. And you can't be afraid. Your journey is your journey. Everyone has the ability to be an activist. Just find your lane, find your passion, and push through with it. And that's all I got.
Yeah, I'll say that in the spirit of the ancestors that I kind of started out here with, Malcolm X, had said, once you change your philosophy, change your thought pattern. Once you change your thought pattern, change your behavior patterns. When you change your behavior pattern, it changes your attitude, and then you go into action. So he will go on to say, if you have a sit down philosophy, you got a sit down thought pattern, right? So good old, Brother Malcolm, Baba Malcolm, really set up for how I see the world and how I understand change to happen. While I'm constantly out here doing groundwork, I know that a big part of being disciplined revolutionary is in the investment I make on my mind and what I consume and what I think, and being clear on what I believe. When I say family-centered practices, and I'm not even necessarily even, I use that strategically too, because some people will shut down an African-centered thinking, right? But if you understand that African-centered thinking has always put the family right there in the middle of everything, and it defines functions in society. If we harness our minds and harness the way we think about who we are and think about our conditions and even understand the functions of white supremacy, then I think success, that anything that is thrown at us, we know how to shake it off, how to bounce back, how to survive, no matter what's going on. And I know that mental health is a serious thing. I'm an advocate for positive behavior and positive mental health and being balanced. But part of that is being sharp, being strong, being unwitted, being as knowledgeable as you can of who you are, whose you are, and what you believe in this world and what informs that.
Powerful words. I'm also taking notes and navigating the chat. So for those that have been actively engaged, I did drop a link for how you can stay connected to all three of us through the Bright Beam Network. And I would definitely just highlight the work of the student leaders in Atlanta, they have a call to action for Black History Month, as I would say Georgia is under attack for saving the nation. And Black and brown children are being forced back in schools. One of the things that they have pushed as a call to action is for all Georgia school board leaders to mandate IHPs. IHPs are individualized health plans. Black children and Black teachers are dying disproportionately, just how we see the data about special education and suspension, et cetera, so forth, in public schools that are overcrowded, that don't have the proper infrastructure to support clean air, clean water. We forget that it's not just Flint, but there were 13 other cities that had lead in their water, including Atlanta, right? And so now we have children that are being pushed back into these schools. And so my call to action would be in honor of my student, as well as one of my classmates who passed away last year in the pandemic, both from heart-related conditions. And it was largely due to the fact that the settings that they were in did not protect them. And so, this call to action from the students is twofold, because yes, we want to protect and save Black lives, but we also want to open up the door for Black families to know that the policies are in place to protect IEPs, which is where the money is attached to, not IHPs, which connect to 504s and SSTs, in other areas that oftentimes are overlooked. And so we need for parents to understand that you have a right to making sure that your child is being protected, even if you're being forced to go back in the face-to-face learning environments. And so that's what my call to action is to make sure that the policies that are implemented are protecting the lives of Black and brown children and teachers.
So thank you guys so much for your participation tonight. You've added so much perspective. I feel like I really do this so I can learn. Like, I mean, it's just, y'all are teaching me and gonna make me better at this work. And I just couldn't appreciate y'all more. So thank you guys for joining. And Jason, to salute to you. We're gonna play the winner from the other night, from the Students Got Something to Say challenge that you introduced us to. So we appreciate you, brother, and we appreciate you, ladies, and we look forward to continuing this work together. Thank y'all so much. We'll do it together.
For me, the worst part about school is standardized testing. I'm expected to remember a year's worth of information in preparation for a single test. Now you may be wondering, what's the problem with that? Well, let me help you out. Let's say I lose a loved one on testing day, or suppose I'm not feeling myself. Then what? The answer is that it doesn't matter because you're still expected to ace the test. Can you see how this method is flawed? This method is basically forcing students to play a game of darts where only the lucky few will hit the center of the board. The center in this case being the perfect standardized test score. What happens if you don't hit the center? Well, in some cases, you're denied from your dream college. In other cases, you're held back an entire grade level. This system needs to change. There are multiple ways to measure student success without depending on a single test to do so. According to the American University School of Education, game-based assessments can measure things like creativity, persistence, and collaboration. The next solution is portfolio-based assessments. Those show change over time rather than on a single day. The hard truth is that the education system is outdated and needs a lot of reform. But if school districts take the first step of listening to the students, then we can start to make a change that will positively affect all the generations to come. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And there were so many other beautiful moments for that night. It was rich. It was incredible. So we are going to roll into the last portion. Well, not the last portion of the night. It's our last chat of the night. We have Mr. Robert Anderson joining us, and we'll be joined momentarily by Rashad Pitt as well. Welcome, Robert. How are you this evening? You're on mute.
You're on mute. And it's like the quote of 2020.
How's my volume? How's my volume?
Beautiful.
Volume? Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the conversation tonight. Appreciate it.
Well, yeah, man. Why don't you give a quick introduction to yourself and why you thought it was important to be a part of this combo?
After 15 years of being in education as a classroom teacher, uh, I can comfortably say that I feel as though I've seen it all. A father of four and married for 15 years, our hands have been full for a long time. Our oldest is 22 and our youngest is 8. And simultaneously, as I was creating a career for myself in education, I started a personal training program where I was able to develop relationships and begin to train some of the finest athletes in the country on the professional level. And the piece that made me different as an educator and what made me different as a trainer was my opportunity and ability to create people on a personal level, allow people to develop on a personal level. And what I realized is the resources that the schools and quite frankly, the families that I worked with was the difference. That they had the ability to close the gap on what our educational system refused to acknowledge. And that's what separated me as an educator working in a district that had the resources, training college and professional athletes that had the resources to access what wasn't being taught in school, and it just wasn't right, and it just hasn't sat right with me from the day that I walked into schools and realized that things aren't equal. And quite frankly, we have a choice. We can be part of the solution or the problem. And now, thankfully, we have solutions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brother Robert. We're going to bring up Rashad as well now. Peace, Rashad. How are you, man?
Hey, good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing?
Very good. We are over our technical difficulties. Rashad is an assistant principal of a high school in Richmond, and we are happy to have him join us as well. Rashad, why did you think it was important to join this combo tonight?
I think representation matters and perspective matters, and I think that when you have the opportunity to share information with others about your experiences and potentially, you want to bring people to this field of education. For me personally, and I think when you have the opportunity to do that and share your words and how there's a deficit within education and a teacher shortage, but most importantly, Blacks in education, Black males to be more specific. I think that that could potentially incite someone who want others to want to join the platform, join the organization, and be able to be more relatable to our children of color.
Well, since you brought it up, I mean that's actually a huge part of the equation. There are not a lot of Black men in the classroom, 2% to be exact. I've actually been a part of a standing Monday night clubhouse chat where we call it the 2%, and we're discussing ways to get more Black men in the classroom. So, Rashad, I guess from your perspective, why don't you share, why do you think that there are not as many as should be in the classroom now? And what do you think some of the ways are to gather more Black men into the classroom?
To be honest, I think some of it could be compensation. And I know one of the main barriers is passing the test. There's been a lot of great educators I know that have been better than myself who've like when I came into education, I came in at 22 years old in Virginia, Peabody Middle School in Petersburg, and had no skill set. I really didn't have and I'm still working on becoming a better teacher, but just had no skill set, 22 years old, thrown into a classroom, and because of my willingness to want to work with, population who have similar background as myself, I was able to navigate through. I had individuals who stepped in the gap for me. They put me in some teacher prep classes, and to help me get over the hump. But I think that that test is definitely, and how can we not be intimidated by the praxis, and what are we doing in the schools of education or historical Black institutions, just prepping our students to be able to be fully considered to be a highly qualified teacher, as the state would put it.
Robert, anything you want to share around the male teacher? I know you've been around schools for a bunch. What would you say are the biggest challenges? I would certainly agree with with the compensation, and obviously that ties back to policy. So if you have any thoughts on shifting that via policy, we'd love to hear those too.
So to the first point, when I was in school, I never had a Black teacher. Male or female. And I went to an outstanding school in Westchester County, in Yorktown, and my educational experience was exceptional. I would say, from a delivery standpoint. But when you're in school and you don't see anyone that looks like you, it's difficult to put yourself in a space of thinking about why you should walk into a school or pursue a degree in education and move on to pursue a position in education. So I would start there as to why we don't see more Black males in our school districts. The second piece is around policy. We know that this gets me, this bothers me. We know that we are not represented in spaces, in education, in the corporate space. And the idea of equity, diversity and equity, is being created or forced into a space of HR. And a space of HR is being created around data and numbers. So the position of diversity and equity is based upon data. It's based upon experience. It's based upon what we can do to create an ROI. And in education, an ROI is not just financial. It's actually having the ability to develop people. And unfortunately, and our reality is, our policy makers and decision makers aren't from traditional, by and large, aren't necessarily from the neighborhoods that we need to see represented. And the policymakers, unfortunately, are not a diverse group. So even with our best of intentions, and I believe that people are good, and I believe we have more good people than we do bad, we have an unconscious bias. And unless we recognize that, while we're making policy and surround ourselves with people that don't look like us, that are diverse, Black women, Black men, people of color, until the policy board represents that, the decision makers, we are going to continue to see a lack of diversity and a lack of policy that supports the Black, brown, and people of color community. That is the ultimate challenge when we speak of policy, specifically when we talk about bringing in a diversity, equity, and inclusion program, or a diversity, equity, and educational program.
Yeah, so I'm sitting here I'm clearly not a Black male educator. And so I am asking questions from the standpoint of, let's go a little bit more micro. So I think that majority of the night we've been talking very macro about policy, very macro about how we make the sort of changes that we want to see in the education system so that students can get their basic needs met, which then allows them to get closer to thriving in the education system. I want to talk about from school policy. For those of us who are working in schools that have the control in some capacity around the policies that they create in those spaces. And so I am the product of Westchester schools. I went to Valhalla High School, and I was one of very few people who looked like me, and there were only 2 Black men in our building, which I hear is still the case. And I think it's important to talk about from a school policy and a district policy perspective, what sort of things have to happen for there, one, to be more Black male educators, but overarchingly for there to be more policies put in place that serve the needs of Black students, regardless of if they're a minority or a majority in that space.
I'll take that first. The first step is our white friends, our white brothers and sisters have to decide that things have to change. Until we see the majority make decisions, until we see the majority become a voice, until the majority decide that the oppressed are being oppressed and it's no longer acceptable, that is when we'll see one of the first steps in bringing a more diverse, specifically Black males to the classroom, Black males to our districts, Black males in positions of influence for our kids, quite frankly, for our white kids and our Black kids. So it begins with the majority. Our responsibility is to speak to the majority as Black, brown, and people of color and ask them to speak up. I mentioned that I believe that people are good and we have more good people. We do. I believe that. But the reality is hate is louder. Hate is louder than love. Hate is louder than positive. We as a community have to connect with the majority in our neighborhoods or on the policy boards or in positions of influence. We have to go to them and hold them accountable and ask them to walk with us, ask them to march with us, ask them to write with us, stand with us and speak up. If we're putting people in positions of influence, now it's our responsibility to ask them to work with us. In diverse areas, we need to speak to our neighbors. When we're the majority, when we're the minority in our neighborhoods, we need to speak to our neighbors, and we need to ask them to speak to our school boards. We need to ask them to speak to our school leadership, because our voices are not enough. If they were, we would already see a change. So those are two spaces where we can be micro and affect change.
And Rashad, what are you seeing in your school in that regard?
Well, our district serves predominantly Black and brown. So I think what needs to happen is we have 2 historical Black colleges to the north and south. We have Virginia State University, we have Virginia Union University, we have Norfolk State in the Tidewood area, also Hampton University. And then Bowie State's not too far because it's just in Maryland. I think if we recruit and establish mentoring programs, so we recruit these males of color. We also institute mentoring programs, which like we do in Richmond, that they have a sounding board. They have someone that they can talk to, kind of help them navigate with being the first, that those fledgling novice years of 1, 2, 3, when you're in education, when you're trying to figure it out, what's your niche, understanding curriculum and trying to implement strategies to support our young learners. I know that even within our surrounding counties, you want the schools to be diverse, and you want to implement these things where we having more representation in these buildings, but there is no support for our teachers, and then we're kind of indoctrinating our students with the same, not really giving them what they need with regards to. We're preaching the same message as our Caucasian counterparts, and not really. They don't see self-authenticity in the person that is considered to be representing them. But I think it would be a lot better if we were to really take our communities back, really invest in those areas where it's predominantly, like for Petersburg, for example, Richmond, and really pour into ourselves and really identify what's the needs assessment within our community and how we can best invest in self, rather than looking to, not as soon as that we see that the scores are not what they need to be, we're looking to jump to neighboring districts.
Right.
But rather to invest, what are the needs of our community? Where are these deficits? How will we get individuals jobs? How can there be a whole community approach to supporting our communities and really invest the way we need to? Because right. the housing market is very serious. People will buy in a certain community and go to another school district using a cousin or a relative's address, right, because they feel like the education is better there rather than staying in the home front. I don't know if I answered your question. Did I answer the question?
You did. I mean, it's a big subject, man. And I, as you were talking, what popped into my head is like the whole thing could be about, just, policy and equity, but we only had 2 hours tonight. So, we covered as much as we could. I want to give you brothers, as we, move towards closing out, an opportunity to kind of leave us with, one last little gem, around, and it could be around anything, around how the village connects, how policy can help the village connect to the village. I know you both are athletes, like how that kind of spins in, and just in 1 or 2 minutes to close this out. You want to start, Rashad, or you want to start?
Oh yeah, I can go.
Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll let Robert close out.
I think that we know that athletics definitely thrives, and extracurricular activities build the opportunity for socialization. But all of our children are not into athletics. So what are some other extracurricular activities that can serve? So, I mean, I would say athletics. I would say, what are we doing for financial literacy within? How can we put that in the community? I mean, we do economics and personal finance as a curriculum, but
right.
How can we learn about Black economics within the community, so that when these students leave, everyone's not college bound, but what career can we go into? How can we introduce more of that vocational or CTE education driven, so that students can feel like, all right, well, this math is relatable to what I'm doing in my job. How are we implementing that in elementary and through secondary, so that when a student transitions out of high school, they know that this is what I'm going into, this is what I'm going to be doing, and this is how I'm going to impact my family and make a living, rather than diverting from that, that path of, leading to, because they feel trapped, they kind of go to a life of crime, or just doing some things that are not fruitful, and that often leads them back in the prisoner pipeline or deceased. So, and then as athletes, helping our student athletes understand the transition into, you're not going to be doing this. You may not be able to do this forever. So what are some other things that you can be transitioning to? How can that be a transferable skill into something in society? You know what I'm saying? I watched I Am Athlete, and just hearing about the gentleman talk about things post their professional careers or post being an athlete. How can we, be fruitful and utilize what we've learned from organized sports and athletics?
Right. Yeah. So much money is getting taken away, and it's it's definitely sad. But we thank you for your participation tonight, Rashad. We definitely look forward to more. Robert, why don't you take us out? I know you got the, you're Robert with the yellow book. You know what I'm saying? That just I want to give you an opportunity to tie that into to policy, please.
I was going to leave us with twofold, but I'm happy to touch on the book, 12 things they wanted to teach in high school but couldn't. But I wanted to speak to everyone in the audience in two realms. One, to community members. If you're here as a community member, it's our responsibility to fix our schools and our policies. And we're overworked and overstressed. We have to choose someone to become our voice. We have to mobilize and allow one person in our communities to go to the school districts, to go to the school board, to read the minutes, to write the letters, to mobilize. From there, we need to have one community activist that's willing to speak with our elected officials, because being divided isn't going to work. We have to do it together. In established communities, you will never see parents attempting to do everything themselves. They mobilize, and we have to do that in Black, brown, and of our people of color neighborhoods. And to our administrators, our folks in positions of leadership, Dr. King has a quote, and he says, at some point, silence is betrayal. You're in a position of leadership, white, not the minority, you're in the majority. It is time to speak up. It is time to say something. We have to change. And the only way that we can do that is by having our majority. One of the ways that we need to do that is by having our majority take the initiative to decide that the oppressor will no longer be oppressed, can no longer be silent because we're afraid to offend someone or say the wrong thing. At some point, silence is betrayal. So we need you to speak up, and we need you to step up. That will bring about change to policy. And we have seen clearly the lack of equity that is bestowed upon our schools due to COVID. COVID is not the cause. COVID is not the cause. COVID has just exposed what is already what we have known as Black, brown, and people of color.
Thank you so much, Robert. We appreciate you for joining us, man, and helping us close out the evening. We're going to let you guys head backstage, and we look forward to connecting with you guys again soon. Thank you so much. All right. Night 3, just about done. What are some of your final reflections, daughter?
There's a lot of work to do. I think that's each night and going into Saturday, that I think that's going to be the common theme. There's a lot of work to do. But I think the beautiful thing and the enlightening thing and the thing that makes my heart happy is that there are so many people doing the work, who are committed to doing the work, and who realize that the work has to happen in multiple different ways. So there's in the classroom, there's outside of the classroom, there's activists, there's policy, there's making connections with our allies, making connections with people who aren't our allies yet and still need to become them, social change and things that we can socially do to support students and support families and support communities, but then down to systemic things that have to happen. And I loved the emphasis and the ability to have conversation tonight about we oftentimes either look back at history and allow it to be all bad, or we look back at history and it's all good and we've made so much change and so many things are different now. And I think that there's way more nuance in that than the way that we often look at it. And so tonight, well, with a lot of what Chioma said, there's such a beautiful need to make a connection, not only for students but for educators, to understand where we come from and what we come from, because when we do that, when we have conversations about gender, we begin to think about where we come from. When we go back to have conversations about race, we think about where we come from. And that doesn't have to be 10 years ago or 20 years ago, or because we often don't think about ourselves as Black people. And even those who are allies here, you often don't think about Black people from pre-indoctrination, pre-colonialism, pre-enslavement, just full and complete and utter attempt at destruction. We don't think about those things, and it's important to think about what and who we were before in order for it to inform who and what we will be. And so tonight was super enlightening for that, and I'm grateful for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the first two nights I actually I finished, I was all light and I just felt good. What happened? Chadwick, what did the first dog do? Oh, okay.
I have a dog, y'all, and he's cutting up. Just give me 1 second.
So, I mean, what I was saying was that those first two nights, I left feeling kind of light. Tonight it's a little bit more heavy because it is making me thinking about, all of the work that needs to be done. I'm certainly heartened at the fact that there are so many incredible people working diligently in this space, but it's the challenge is huge. But that's why we call this Creating the Future of Education Together, because if we all begin the process of doing the lifting together, the burden is not going to be too much on any one person. I believe that the time is now. I believe that that there are a lot of people who are listening. And I think that if we make these demands and not request, and let them know that we're not going to stop. Like we're not going to all of a sudden, go back to being comfortable with the way things were. We are going to apply pressure. We're going to keep applying pressure until these changes are made. We are going to shame the people who do not serve our children properly, whether it be the people who are making money because of the standards, and people who are making money because of the test, and things to that effect. The people who are fighting our ability to allow our kids to play, and allow our kids to be involved with music and art, and like anybody who is okay with that not being a part of what happens in our communities, we are going to fight you, and we're going to fight you tooth and nail. And so just fall back, because you don't want the smoke. We're ready, and we're just not going to take it anymore. So we definitely appreciate everybody's attendance tonight. We want to once again say thank you to our sponsors, the Black Community Alliance at TFA, the Center for Black Educator Development. Big shout to the Bright Beam and Citizen Ed team. Big shout to Ideation 4. Big shout to Teens Take Charge. We appreciate all of you guys, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. And we will see you good folks on Saturday.
We'll see you on Saturday. And so the last thing I wanted to do before we leave is leave us with this. It is the start. We talked too much about Bettina Love not to give a shout out back. So she picks W.E.B. Du Bois's quote to start out the book and writes, "What do we want? What is the thing we are after? We want to be Americans, full-fledged Americans with all the rights of American citizens, but is that all? Do we want to simply be Americans? Once in a while, though, through all of us, There flashes some clairvoyance, some clear idea of what America really is. We who are dark can see America in a way that white Americans cannot, and seeing our country thus, are we satisfied with its present goals and ideals? And so that question, we have to leave today and every other day as educators asking ourselves, are we satisfied with its present goals and ideals? And if not, well, what are we going to do about it? Have a good night, y'all.
Peace.